What is up, everyone? This is your host, Eric Holtzman, and welcome to the Mindful Motion Podcast. What's up, everybody? I'm here with Hoang. Did I say that right?
Hoang.
Hoang? Sorry. I should have asked
okay.
before we started. But
technically it
we're here to
is
talk
Hoang. It's just, anyways.
No, thank you for correcting me. I don't like to get people's names wrong. So Anne is a movement and parkour coach who is passionate about helping people feel safe and confident in their bodies so that they are ready for their next adventure in their lives. Anne uses breath work, strength training, movement coaching, corrective exercise, and parkour to teach clients about their bodies and make them more efficient, more confident so that they can do the things that they love by exploring strategies that help them essentially move freely. So I would love to jump in and kind of learn a little bit more about your journey into parkour, your journey into fitness, because I'm sure it's interesting. How'd you get started?
Definitely. So growing up, I was a little bit on the heavier side. So I think my mom tried to put me into all different types of sports to get me active and get me moving. And so growing up, I dabbled in a lot of things. I dabbled in karate, got caught up with video games and then stopped karate. I did a little bit of ice skating, and that was fun until I was probably 7 or so. It was fun until I found out like what you had to wear if you were to compete in ice skating. And I was like, oh man, I don't want to wear the tutu. I don't want to wear a leotard. And then somehow, some way, I think it's because there was a gymnastics gym that opened up really nearby, and so it was very convenient. And so my mom put me in gymnastics, and I didn't connect gymnastics to leotards at that time because I could just wear like basketball shorts and a t-shirt. And I did gymnastics for a few years, maybe from age 8 until 12. And I did actually end up competing when I was around 11 or 12, and I got over wearing the leotard thing, though it was not my favorite. So gymnastics has definitely been like a fundamental part of my movement kind of like journey. But unfortunately, my gymnastics gym closed when I was in middle school. And so that's when I got into more traditional, like regular school sports. So I did like basketball, cross country, track and field. And I found that I really enjoyed track and field. So that's something that I continued on in high school. And my favorite events in track and field were the high jump, triple jump, and the long jump. I just really, really enjoyed jumping. Past high school, went to college. I don't think I'm tall enough to be a good track athlete. And I also was not, didn't get a scholarship in track or anything. So I was trying to find a different sport to do because I do like to stay active. I went to UC Santa Barbara for college, and I ended up joining their rugby team. So it's a club sport. And so I played rugby for Santa Barbara for about 3 years. And I really enjoyed that. That's when I started getting into strength training, because when we had rugby, it was 2 days in the weight room, 3 days on the field, and then probably 1 day for our game. And so that really introduced me to, I guess, lifting weights. We also kind of went into Olympic lifting when we were in rugby as well. But post college, I didn't want to get thrown around anymore. Like, I'm not a very tall person or a very large person. I'm like 5'4", 100 something pounds. And I was just getting tired of getting thrown around. And so post college, I worked at Equinox as a trainer for a couple of years, and I was always just like jumping around on the boxes. Like, I obviously really still like jumping. And then my coworkers joked, and they're like, "Oh, you should be on American Ninja Warrior." And so I took the idea and I Googled literally like American Ninja Warrior gym. And then this parkour gym called Tempest Free Running Academy popped up on the search results. And so I took my first free trial class, and I found out that I really enjoyed parkour and like all the things that are part of the sport, and kind of ran with that. What got me into kind of what I do right now as a movement coach is when I started parkour, I was about 23 or so, and I was having a lot of knee pain when I was jumping. And I felt like I shouldn't have knee pain. I was so young, 23, like I shouldn't be hurting while I'm just trying to jump over this box. And trying to figure out why my knee was hurting, going to physical therapy, and then not really solving the problem or not really feeling like it was getting better. And so I decided to really try to dive into some other things to help resolve my knee issues, because I was really determined to be jumping around for the rest of my life.
Hmm. Yeah, that's sadly a lot of people's experiences. They have something that's going on, they try the normal channels, and it doesn't seem to get them there. So you've had some success exploring some of these other things, which we'll definitely dive into because I'm interested to learn about them. I don't know much about some of these other techniques that you've seen or gone through, so we'll definitely get into that. But I kind of want to just get a sense of like the parkour thing. Like, I get the story of how you got started in that, but like, what do you think about, like, what is it about jumping and parkour that gets you so excited that you like it so much?
One of my favorite parts of parkour is definitely feeling uncomfortable about something
Mm.
and then being able to trust in your abilities and in your technique to be able to achieve that challenge. Um, I also just enjoy being able to see the environment in a different way. So, like, for example, this pillar behind me, it's like, oh, like I could possibly like climb up this thing. And so we call it like parkour vision, where you just see structures in a whole different light. I imagine that skateboarders or street skateboarders have a similar type of vision. It's a lot of fun for me to like walk around the city and just envision these types of things. Another reason why I really enjoy parkour is because I feel like it's a very true expression of movement that's not necessarily governed by like particular rules. Like, sure, there's technique and things to help you stay safe, but there's not really any rules to it, which is a lot of fun. And in that way, it reminds me a lot of an art.
It's like you really putting everything on the line when you're doing this stuff. Like, it freaks me out watching people do these some of these events, jumping off like 20-foot story buildings and stuff. Like, there must be some fear there. How do you get past the fear of like, I could die if I do this?
I think it's for some people, I really think that fear aspect is not really there. So those folks who are jumping off 20-foot story buildings or launching themselves into things that are at like roof height stuff or like
Mhm.
several stories above, I think with them, they really trust that they practice this so much that they can trust their body. Like, oh, it's the same thing. It's the same distance as if I were to jump it on the ground. And I think that a lot of folks just, or a lot of those type of people don't have that fear aspect of it. For me, I
Mm.
definitely have that fear aspect of it. I don't have I don't feel a real need to go up on top of a roof and jump around. And I think that's also the beauty of what parkour is, because there are so many different entryways into the sport. Like, you don't need to be doing roof gaps. Like, you can be jumping around on flat ground. And it's really about how you
Mm.
express yourself within the environment.
That makes sense. There's a spectrum of risk here, and you can decide how deep you want to get into it. I think
Yeah.
that's good to know. Um, with parkour, is there any type of difference with the way you train, different forms of training? Like, how do you prepare for these things?
For parkour, I started by taking a class at a gym, and I think that's a really good way to go about it because they do teach you basic techniques, and there is a way to throw yourself at a wall and not get hurt. And so, technique is, I think, one of the most important things when you're doing parkour. If you have bad technique when you take impact, then you can really get hurt. Like, I've sprained ankles, I've broken wrists, I've gotten concussions, and a lot of it came from like just being new at parkour and not understanding the importance of having good technique. So to go back to your question of like how do I train for it, I think that it's really important to either find a resource that really cares about um, like how you're going about these different parkour skills and how you can do them safely. At least in my perspective, because I don't feel like I need to send humongous things that are like necessarily life threatening, but I like to make sure that I push myself. Um, it's important for
Mm.
me to do things that will promote longevity in the sport versus trying to just like huck it or trying to send it for the purpose of sending it. not to say that there's something wrong with that, but it's just not what I enjoy doing, because there are definitely folks in the parkour community, and like a lot of respect to them, who like love to send these huge things. And like, yes, they may get hurt, but that's also kind of involved in the sport. And I know for a fact that they've prepared themselves as much as they can in order to send those types of things. So for my own type of training, I would say I coach parkour, and luckily, since I coach a lot of beginner parkour, I can work on the fundamentals of parkour often. So I coach parkour for about 24 hours a week or so. So I think training fundamentals is really key. Um, Past training, I do about 2 days of parkour skill training. I do about 2 days of strength training, and then 1 day of like a recovery mobility type of training day.
So yeah, I mean, this is sort of a lesson in any skill set, right? Is the fundamentals are kind of critical. Same in the gym environment, like getting good at those things or kind of make it or break it in a lot of ways. Um, would you say that doing parkour athletically, does it ever come into sessions with just a regular person who isn't a parkour athlete?
Yeah, I think that having this parkour background, it helps me understand how like it helps me understand how people are just moving generally about their life. So like if they're stepping down from, I don't know, stepping down from a counter, or if they're jumping off the counter, or if they're trying to play with their kids, um, I think it's important to be able to teach folks how to absorb impact properly. And so I think with my parkour background, I have a different approach of how I see that. Another way that I think it's
Mm.
really helpful and useful is like one of my clients is a touring artist. And so when she's on stage and like jumping around and bouncing around, like I want to make sure that she stays safe while she's on stage moving around. So that's another way that parkour mechanics, or just generally learning how to manage your body in your environment, I think is
Mhm.
really important.
Yeah, I don't think that's often covered in fitness generally that much, like the skill of movement, how to compensate when you need to decelerate
Yeah.
forces and adjust your body positioning for different tasks. It's sort of, well, yeah, it's an art in a way, like you said. Um, a lot of value that can come out of that for sure.
And I
Would
like
you
how you said
say,
it's
because
definitely a
I always,
skill.
yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
Definitely can lend to a lot of things in life. So would you say though that there are certain types of body types that lend to parkour more? Like is a 6'5", 280-pound guy going to do it very well? Or have you seen big guys do it? Or is it always typically smaller people?
I've seen tall boys do it. Um, there are few, I think, overweight athletes, but there are some. I think there's some guy on Instagram who's his handle is like the fat tree runner or something like that. So it is like you can, but generally I do see folks who tend to be a little bit more, uh, I guess, normal weight, if
Mm,
anything. But because there are so many entryways to parkour, I really think at any size, or any size, you'll be able to find something that you'll be able to enjoy with it. There
got it.
are advantages to being smaller. There are advantages to being longer. And so some people will be better at certain skills than others. But because there are so many different skills within the realm of parkour, like someone can be really good at Kong vaults, and then someone can be really good at swinging or laches. Um, and then sometimes body type does kind of play into that.
Mhm. That makes sense. It's kind of similar with like lifting or any sport, right? You can be better at certain aspects of it depending on your shape, how big you are, how heavy you are, all that. How would you say your life's changed with your exercise experiences and introducing parkour into your life?
I think it's given me a lot more confidence to just like move about, and more confidence that I'll be able to age gracefully. Um, I like the idea of being able to get up and down from the ground, and like climb up and down from things. Especially like I'm not old at all, but like as I start to approach, I don't know, maybe like my 40s or my 50s, that's something that I think is going to be really important for me. And because there's like so many ways to get into parkour and so many ways to express yourself with parkour, I feel pretty good about like finding different things that I'll focus on, that I feel like that I can progress in. Like I don't know probably won't be jumping as far as I am now when I'm like 60, but I know that there's going to be other technical aspects of parkour. For example, maybe like I get really good with my footwork, or I get into more of like the flow aspect of things that I can focus on as I'm kind of getting older. And so it's nice that it's such a sport with so many different avenues compared to maybe like me playing rugby. Like I'm not going to play rugby when I'm 60. I'm not going to get hit or stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really wise perspective, already thinking about your future with this sport. And I think that's good advice for anyone that has a sport that they love. How can you maybe think about the way you would maybe adjust how you're performing or doing it so that you can do it longer? It's a smart thing to have in the mind. Because you're right, we're not always going to be, spry young kids. We got to make adjustments with our training, with our sports. Within your business, you said you do teach parkour probably like at least 50% or more of your weekly workload. But outside of that, like with your strength training and personal training business, like what kind of clients do you help mostly?
Recently, I've been getting a lot of female clients, and they tend to be in their late 20s or early 40s. And they often were, it's kind of funny how they're so opposite. They were either athletes earlier in their life, like when they were teenagers or even like college, or they were never athletes at all. And so it's interesting to get those two spectrums of my clients. Most of my clients have the goal of being able to do activities that they have never been able to do or that they want to get back into doing.
Can you give us a few examples? Like, what does that look like?
For one of my clients, for example, she wants to get back into being able to do classes on ClassPass because she enjoys variety of like different types of movement. And so my goal for her is like, okay, cool. Like you want to go take these different fitness classes and have fun of like dancing or rock climbing or even like this body boot camp type of thing. That's awesome. And like, can we get your body to a point where you can do all of those things and then not wreck yourself doing them? Because especially with like one of those one-off classes, like they're not always going to be focused on like how you're going about it. Oftentimes they're going to be teaching a skill, which doesn't always help you. If you have chronic pain, it doesn't always like adjust for that often. And so I want to be able to give my clients the freedom to be able to choose what they want to do and feel good and safe doing it. So that's kind of just like one example.
So in this example, this client of yours was having some sort of issue in certain movements or discomfort or pain of some kind. Like, how do you, I guess in this example or in general, if you want to go that direction, like how do you address pain in someone's body and how do you help them overcome that and regain function so that they can do things that they like without that getting in their way?
Yeah. For me, it's important to have an initial baseline test. So I'll do some basic table test measurements to kind of help piece together what their body currently is at. I've also done a lot of like watching video. We'll go into like how I got into watching a lot of video. It goes into like when I was part of the GOTA movement system, but being able to assess or just like observe how people stand, how they carry themselves about their posture, the way that they walk, the way that they run is really useful for me to get a gauge of like what they are compensating in. I often look at like foot placement, how their limbs are moving, what is being torqued, what's not being torqued, how do they distribute their weight from side to side. So I initially get a baseline. And then from there, I like to kind of pick apart like, okay, so it seems like you have some pretty unstable hips. Like when you're taking when you're landing on your right side, your hips way off to over here. So let's make sure that we start to incorporate some hip stability type of things and see if that will start to correct it. I tend to do reassessments every month or so with similar types of exercises to help gauge folks and to help make sure that we're moving along in the right direction. With the exercises that I do, a big focus is making sure that they're able to feel the right things when they're doing a particular movement. There are so many people who are like, oh yeah, I can do a squat, or like here's my back squat, and they like do 10 reps with weight or something like that. And then I ask them after, oh, like what did you feel when you were doing that exercise? And then they'll be like, oh, I don't know, I just did the squats. So connecting folks to their muscles, I think, is really important, making sure that they understand what needs to be functioning, and that translates to them being able to like do movement on their own without my supervision. So then they get an understanding of like, oh, this is how it's supposed to feel. It's not feeling this way. I can either ask for help or I can try to troubleshoot it on my own.
Mm. Yeah, the sensory stuff is kind of crazy. Gets all over the map sometimes for people. It's so weird. But there's good reasons for that. So
Yeah.
you mentioned this GOTA thing. What is that about? What does that stand for, or what's it? What are the principles, tenets for it?
When I was looking for solutions to my knee pain, one of the movement systems that I came across through Instagram, kind of a wild place for fitness, Instagram, was GOTA,
Yeah.
and it stands for Greatest of All Time Athletes. And so their whole thing was that their founder used a whole watched thousands of hours of slow motion video and started to see similar patterns from elite athletes, the way that they walked, the way that they sprinted, the way that they jumped. Um, and he started connecting it with other things in the world, like how I think animals were moving, how babies were moving. So a lot of like focused attention on like slow motion video and using video, and then using that to like nitpick at certain movements to try and figure out where compensations were. I did that system where I was really a big part of it from like early 2018 2019 until 2020 2021. And I can't tell you what they are doing right now, but I know that a big part of their thing was looking at slow motion video and trying to replicate patterns that they saw in high level athletes and high level movers and or movers who are moving like way into like their older age.
So you film someone, a client doing an activity of some kind you choose, and you try to infer potential issue out of that, and then you prescribe an exercise. So they like teach you, here's what you see. If you see this, you're gonna do this. Is that sort of how it is?
I think that's a good representation of it. Yeah. And I
Okay.
think there was issue with that because like your eyes can fool you often. And in addition, like what you see, the outcome isn't necessarily what you want to mimic. There are like attributes that you have that might lead to that outcome. And so that's kind of where I started to detract from GOTA.
So it kind of you got turned off by it because it wasn't fully making sense to you. Is that fair to say?
It wasn't fully making sense to me. And then at the time, I didn't feel like they were very open to like learning more things outside of their own system.
Mm,
In my own performance, like after doing their exercises for quite some time, I felt like that my gait was getting kind of funky and loose. And I also felt like I wasn't performing very well in parkour. Um,
mm,
I felt like I lost power. I hyperextended my knee for the first time ever. And then I think I ran a half marathon like my last year of doing GOTA, and then my knees, like I had like the most interesting outside pain on the outside part of my knees for the first time in my life. And I was like, I think that the way that I'm training has something to do with this. And so I have to
mhm.
find something and figure something else out.
Right. Yeah. I mean, if you're not feeling better from what you're doing, then that might not be the right thing. Yeah, it's such an interesting idea. I guess this isn't that crazy because this is stuff that people have done forever, but it's just really hard to imagine you can be that precise and consistent just by watching people perform activities and then try to assume you know what's happening. That's got to be really tough to do.
Yeah. And I
So
also
after
think that,
that,
sorry, go ahead.
no, go ahead.
I also think that uh, watching athletes who you haven't trained, I don't think you can put that much basis onto it. Like, you don't know if your exercise will make you perform like Michael Jordan, which is an athlete that they would use often, be like, oh, like, look the way that he lands. Like, if you do our exercises, you're going to land like that. But like, I don't know, you didn't train Michael Jordan, so it's not a true, you know, type of connection.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Plus, I mean, are you accounting for all the differences in his physiology that no one else has? Like, you can't assume that everyone should do the same thing the same way. That's a little crazy. And there, like you probably were alluding to, it's a little concerning when an educational institution is so dogmatic and isn't open to potential other inputs. That's a problem.
Yeah.
So that led you to this whole postural restoration institute. That's something more recent that you've gotten into.
Yeah. When I was in Goda, I met a trainer. Her name is Kasha. She's super awesome. And she got into postural restoration. And she was telling me that it had a lot of the missing pieces that she felt like Goda was overlooking. And one of those pieces was breathing. And so I was really interested in trying to figure out, like, oh, is there like proper breathing mechanics? We take more breaths in a day than we do steps. So I do feel like maybe I should take a look into like how are we supposed to breathe. And I think this was at the start of the pandemic when a lot of people were doing a lot more meditation apps and like focusing on trying to breathe. And so my clients would ask me at that time, they're like, oh, like how are you supposed to breathe? Am I breathing wrong? Should I breathe only with my mouth? Should I just breathe with my nose? Things like that. And so that posture restoration was a nice avenue to start to understand like proper respiratory mechanics.
So is their main thing is trying to breathe properly, or is there other aspects to it?
Um, to me, what I feel like they are really great at is that they explore postural adaptations. Within that, they also explore how our body is asymmetrically balanced, and they also explore how they explore the influence of different polyarticular chains of the muscles. And so I found that to be really, really interesting. Another thing that was great about it, coming from like the alternative biomechanic world of fitness on Instagram, like Goda or WEC Method or Flowbility, a lot of those types of things. At least PRI was very rooted in research, which was kind of refreshing. And they are also very open to like questions and very focused on like trying to get you to understand what they want you to learn, which I don't always feel like is they encourage asking questions is what I'm
Yeah.
trying to say. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Totally get
Backtracking
that.
to what they do, they like to look at how our bodies are asymmetrical, and then how our different joint positionings, how they can affect how our muscles can function. They also really explore how a lot of folks nowadays in our society are hyper sympathetic, or they're overly sympathetic, and how that can affect the way that we're breathing, in turn can affect how the way that we are resting, which can in turn affect the way that we carry ourselves in our posture and in our gait.
Kind of looking at this more holistically, you said something about being asymmetrically balanced. Does that mean more like if my right leg is turned in, I'm going to turn my left leg out as a sort of response to that? And is that sort of what you meant, or what is that? What's asymmetrically balanced mean?
Kind of. It's more of like within our body, we're literally not the same from one side to the other. Like our heart is on our left side, our liver is on the right side, our diaphragm is literally smaller on our left than on our right. And so sometimes due to the asymmetry of our body, there can be imbalances and like typical patterns that are associated with system disuse or weakness that develops because of like our asymmetry. Our asymmetry might lead into some dominant overuse. We might fall into a certain pattern that we're not able to get out of. An example of this would be like the weight of our upper part of our body might shift our torso to the left, and because of that, like you're saying, it might shift our lower half to the right. And so I don't think that I've delved too deeply into PRI to like speak too heavily on the topic. Like I've taken 3 courses from them, and I definitely want to take a lot more. But I think that their approach to how working with the asymmetry of our body is really, really unique. Because to me, it's like, oh, like the reason why the right side of my back hurts could be totally different than the reason why my left side of the back hurts, which I think a lot in the rehab or like fitness industry, we're always trying to like be as equal as we can. And I think PRI gives you some like almost breathing room or like just understanding, which is I think a little bit of a relief as to like, oh, why am I so twisted up in this way? And like, how can I untwist in the other way? And I think a big thing for them is like not being stuck in a certain pattern and being able to alternate properly from side to side.
Got it. Yeah. More realistic expectations, not assuming that we should be perfectly even left to right, which is an unrealistic goal. And I spent a lot of time trying to get people even, but never in my mind am I like, you have to be perfectly even. That doesn't, like you said, that's not even how we are as human beings. So that would be a little unrealistic. But so what are the, I guess, the prescriptions or ways of changing the system? What do they use to do that?
I would say that they really try to balance muscle activity. And specifically, they try to balance muscle activity around like the pelvis and the sternum and the sphenoid. They do a lot of, to me, it seems like they're trying to balance this muscle activity and they're trying to get your body okay with being in a pattern that you're not used to. So say that you're stuck in a certain pattern, like you're really right side heavy. In order for your body to feel comfortable alternating to your left, you have to own that left side position. A way that you're able to like own that left side position is being able to properly breathe through it. Something that I remember from one of their courses is your body's not going to want to be in a place where it can't breathe. And so a lot of their techniques involve like you're in a soft inhale through the nose, long exhale through the mouth. You're going to pause for a few seconds and then repeat the process. And so I really think it's about getting your nervous system to be comfortable owning a position that you might have lost or you might not be able to get into as well.
Okay. So is it like, say someone can't bend left super well, you might go to that side, hold it, and breathe in that position so you get more comfortable with it? Is that sort of the idea? Or you're
Yeah,
actually
in a
training
way.
it?
And then in a way, so they'll get into a position where they're able to bend to their left side. Usually it's a combination of like, maybe you have to get your left hamstring, your left obliques, and other different muscles in that chain involved, and then holding that left hamstrings, left adductors, left obliques, and holding that position in order to feel comfortable there. And then PRI, I think, does a really great job of finding progressions for folks. And so they have different variations of targeting specific muscle groups or muscle chains, whether it's like starting from a supine position or a side lying position, prone position, and taking folks through different ways of how to own that muscle group or that chain of muscle groups, that joint position, with gravity acting upon you on different ways.
Interesting. Okay. Yeah, sounds very similar to something we call bioconfigurationalism in my one of my classes. Essentially,
Sounds so
it's just the
fancy.
idea. Huh?
Yeah, that sounds
So
so
a lot.
fancy.
Yeah, I know. It's a mouthful, but it's basically just saying, hey, if you can't have trouble bending left, let's see how many different ways we can put you in that left bend on your stomach, on your back, on your side, standing up, and then have you be really stable and strong there. Because if you can do something in a wide range of ways, you're going to have a more robust system and more capable system, which is kind of what you're saying, and that's brilliant.
Yeah,
So
and like all these systems
with
have like pieces to the puzzle, right? Like everyone has something that you want to kind of
bring in,
be able
yeah.
to integrate. Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like you have a few different. These are just a couple. I'm guessing you've had other educational systems or experience from other modalities. Maybe like, how do you work with people? Like, what's your assessment look like? What's your sessions look like? How's that unfold for you?
Generally, I'll do an assessment. We do some range of motion tests, get a baseline, like table test type of things. I'll watch their squat, their toe touch, their how they're able to stand on one leg, stand on the other leg, walking, running, sprinting. I really love seeing people sprint. Like I understand that it is like a skill to be able to sprint, but in a sprint you like are not thinking. Whereas I've seen people or experienced people trying to consciously change how they walk to try to fit into what I want to see on the assessment. And so that's not something that I want to happen either. Anyways, so assessment, generally I try to start with some low hanging fruit. So for example, if like in their postural assessment, it seems like their hips are really far pushed forward, I using concepts from PRI and using some concepts from other strength training certifications that I've done, I try to figure out, okay, like, are you really pushed forward because your pelvis is really tipped forward? Why is your pelvis really tipped forward? What muscles do we have to strengthen? Okay, maybe we have to get those proximal hamstrings into the picture. We got to get that TVA into the picture. We got to get those obliques into the picture so we're able to balance you a little bit more. So typically in a session, I'll start with mobility correctives as a warm-up. And examples are just like simple hamstring bridges or like teaching them how to do 8-point plank, like wall supported kickouts, things like that. Sometimes I even mix in like some breathing things to teach them how to direct air into certain spots of their body. For example, directing air into their back ribs or directing air into their chest. After mobility correctives, we go into more of like, I would say isometrics. And then after isometrics, we go into more of like strength training things. And then past that, might add in some plyometrics, depends on what their goal is. So I generally start like mobility stuff, we get into isometrics, we get into strength training, and then more specific things. And this can depend from person to person and how they work. Like for myself specifically, I generally start with like mobility corrective that I need to work on. And then from there, I'll go into a dynamic warm up. And then I'll go do parkour, or I'll do mobility correctives, ISOs, and then I'll go strength train.
So why do you structure it in that way?
I like to structure it in that way because I feel like the mobility correctives gets people in the right headspace to focus. And then it also helps them get into positions that they might not be able to get to just walking into the gym or walking into the session. But I think the biggest thing is it just helps them get into the right headspace of like, hey, we need to focus and I need you to feel the things and you need to communicate with me that we need to feel these things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And what is the purpose of the isometrics?
I like isometrics because one, I think it helps you understand how muscles can engage. And a lot of the isometrics that I do, we're not actively contracting. I would say that we're almost holding a more, I don't even like more of an eccentric type of position. So I'm not having them squeeze and hold isos. It's more of like, for example, like a split stance hip hinge and then being able to feel their glutes lengthen. I think that really helps with them understanding like what they should be feeling in their squat. And I like isometrics because there's a little movement and they can just focus on what they're feeling. From there, if they are able to feel what I want them to feel from those isos, then moving on to squats or more like dynamic movements, it's easier for them to understand what they need to be feeling. And it's easier for me to cue because now they know what I'm looking for and what they need to be looking for when they're doing that exercise.
Okay. Yeah, it sounds like you're almost just preparing them for the harder stuff in a way, getting their mind
Yeah.
right, getting their body prepared physically, which is, yeah, that's great. Um, do you do anything specifically for yourself or for your clients that are, you mentioned mobility stuff, which I'm assuming is sort of an injury prevention type of mindset. What does mobility training look like in your world?
In my world, it looks like a lot of PRI techniques that help people understand what muscles need to fire in order to achieve a certain range of motion. It also entails like learning how to expand your back ribs if in your breath. So then that way, like things can glide and move a little bit better. Um,
Can you unpack that a little bit? Like, what is that? Like, how do you get someone
Yeah.
to, like you mentioned, breathing from different parts of your rib cage and chest? Like, how does that happen?
Yeah. For example, something that I like to do for myself personally, especially if my upper back is feeling really tight, is I'll kind of sit into a deep squat, have my hands kind of hanging off of something. And then from here, I want to try to breathe into my upper back so my air goes backwards and it feels like a nice stretch from the inside out. And then I find that helps really like get rid of a lot of funky stuff that is in my back. And I like that you're doing it by yourself and that you don't necessarily need like a tool in order for you to be able to achieve that. Sometimes what I mean by like compression in your back and you're expanding it is like if we're standing and then we're like, especially when I'm coaching, I'm kind of like here because I'm very hyper alert. I coach a lot of children, and so children and parkour need to be very alert. And so I also don't want to be stuck here. And so that breathing and learning how to breathe into other parts of my rib cage, like by putting myself in a position that will bias airflow back there, is something that I think is helpful for mobility too. So it's just like restoration of that position that you want to have in. I think movement variability is really important to me.
Okay. Yeah, it's kind of a crazy field, this whole breath thing. It's very deep if you really dive into it. I even remember, I don't know if you heard about this one. I can't remember the name of it, but it was like a whole system about breathing and trying to correct scoliosis by breathing in certain positions to try to reshape the structure of the spine, which was like mind blowing, which apparently there was some success in it because people are still doing it. It's kind of nuts though, because you could have different parts of your spine, rib cage not moving because of improper breathing mechanics, and you can alter that, and it's really remarkable. When it comes to like structuring your workouts for your clients, it sounds like you already painted a picture of how you do that, but is your assessment seeing how they move lending to what you decide to do in your sessions, or is it also just basic strength training? Like what do sessions look like? How do you structure them?
Um,
Like
the monthly
exercise?
assessments do help with how I program for their correctives, but in terms of strength training, I do have a pretty like solid rotation of things that we just generally usually always do. Um, your squat, I like a split stance deadlift. I have a variations of push-ups that I enjoy doing, variations of pull-ups that I enjoy doing. And so in terms of like strength training exercises, they're pretty like have the same like 6 different exercises that we kind of work through.
Mm-hmm.
But and then those exercises are often stemmed from like another movement system that I enjoy called OKF, or One of a Kind Fitness, that was founded by one of my colleagues, Devin Brown. His stuff is super interesting because he is all about how your strength training should complement or improve your gait cycle. So I thought that's an interesting way to think of like why you're strength training. And kind of on that tangent, I like to strength train so I can get better in parkour, and so I can feel more confident in my movement in parkour, and so I can feel more fluid. And so the exercises that I choose when I strength train, I want it to translate to that. I think he's come up with some great concepts that are not necessarily touched upon in traditional strength training. Like, for example, he is definitely influenced by like the spinal engine theory. He's also influenced by like how you manage your center of gravity, which I really appreciate because I think that in parkour, it's a lot about how you manage and how you are
Mm-hmm.
balanced from front to back. And he also is really focused on like how are we able to own like neutral positions in our strength training so that when we go out to do explosive movements that have other like external forces pushing us, that we have the wiggle room to move to that area if we are in a more neutral kind of like spot, if we're neutrally stable.
Mm. So how does someone train or structure their strength training around improving the gait cycle? Like I have ideas in my mind, but I'm sure there's a specific thought process there. What does that look like?
For myself right now, I definitely am under the mindset of trying to train more neutral positions. So like, for example, in a squat, I try to have my feet straight and or slightly toed in to kind of prevent excess pronation. When I squat down, my knees go straight forward. Like all my life, I've been told to like push my knees out in a squat. And so having them track directly forward is definitely different. In terms of like doing like pushing exercises, remembering that like we don't move up and down in a straight line, that we're actually pushing in a diagonal type of fashion. Um, what what do I feel when I'm doing those pushes? It really is centered around like being able to own neutral positions and be able to be stable, laterally stable from side to side, and to be able to have a stable lumbo hip pelvic complex. So then that if we are stable in our pelvis, we're able to like come into different positions with our pelvis when we need to, which I think happens a lot in explosive movements.
Okay. So it's not really necessarily changing strength training completely. It's just having the mindset of like, hey, we also want to consider what happens with walking and when we change positions and we're doing activities on a day-to-day basis. Like, how can we make those things better? Is that sort of fair to say?
Yeah, I would say that. And like, what exercises are you choosing? And like you said, how do they affect our walk? I personally don't really Olympic lift or power lift for what I do in parkour. I think if you're an Olympic lifter or a power lifter, it's like great because that's what you want to improve in your sport. But I don't think that it translates too well to how you run and how you jump, how you sprint. Again, it could vary. Like people with different body types might really benefit from that type of training. Um, but that's kind of what I was doing a lot of when I was in my early 20s because of rugby and because I was working as a trainer at a box gym. So I kind of strayed away from that for a little bit. And I think you'll notice that like different types, the way that different types of people who train different types of way, like bodybuilders, the way that they walk is going to be different than like how a soccer player walks, or like a power lifter, how they walk is going to be different than how another athlete walks.
Yeah, we all walk very differently. If you ever take a second to observe different people, it's all over the map for sure. Um,
Yeah.
so when you go through a session with a client or yourself, like how do you know or how do you determine it was a successful session? Like what are you looking for? What kind of feedback do you want to hear?
For me, it's like the client is able to complete the workout with minimal to no pain, be able to like consciously feel which muscles need to be working, and to feel challenged but not frustrated. So at the end of the session, they are maybe a little bit mentally fatigued and physically fatigued, but hopefully not frustrated. And I also hope that like they feel like they feel better after the session, that they don't feel wrecked after the session or feel wrecked the day after, so then we can continue to build the next day that for the next time that I
Mm,
see them.
okay. So making sure they enjoyed it, they were able to do it without discomfort, but also, if they want to work out tomorrow, they can because you didn't wreck them or they didn't wreck themselves. That's perfectly reasonable. I
Yeah.
feel like that's something people need to do, right?
Yeah, and again, like it
I don't know
depends on the
about you,
person.
but
Like if they want to feel like they really push themselves, like sure, I can do something like that. But like I understand that people have day jobs, people have children to take care of.
yeah, you gotta like your workout should lend to your improvement of your life, not be a distraction or toll.
Yeah, I agree.
Is there anything like new right now you're super fascinated with or interested in exploring or anything that new in your world?
I'm still really interested in posture restoration. I really want to take a live course soon. Another system that I'm interested in learning more about is DNS. I think you've heard of them, like dynamic neuromuscular stabilization. Um, and I think
Uh,
they're cool because they look at movement and posture from like a developmental standpoint, and so they'll
mhm,
have uh, folks like go through like 3 month like essential landmark or checkpoints for 3 month old or 6 month old, so on and so forth. Because sometimes I do think folks can miss certain milestones when they're learning how to crawl or when they're learning how to walk, that can lead to certain dysfunctions in their movement. So
Hmm.
PRI, DNS are things that I'm currently like at least movement wise still interested in. I'm still heavily fascinated with parkour. Still trying to like practice as much as I can. And I videotape so many people or like screen record so many athletes doing these huge jumps and trying to take away like what is it about them that they can, what is it about their technique that they're able to land this, or why does it look so smooth and why does it look so clean. um, this year in parkour I'm mostly competing in skills, which is like the technical aspect of parkour. They'll give you different parkour challenges and you'll have to complete them and complete them in a way that they have told you to do so. Like if you need to stick a landing, you need to stick a landing. But another offshoot of parkour that I'm kind of getting more fascinated with is freestyle. And so that's when you see folks doing flips and connecting different like stylistic movements into their lines. And so I'm kind of looking into that after this parkour season is over.
That sounds interesting. There's so many facets to this. It's kind of fun to explore. I would love to be able to do that. I think the risk
Yeah.
is too high for me though, with my neck.
I remember.
You know, I know you gotta get out of here soon, but I just one more question, if it's okay. I'm kind of curious. Like, if you could go back and 10 years ago and give yourself advice, what advice would you give yourself?
Um, keep looking for things that bring you joy. That's and maybe look into a stunts career.
A stunt
I
career.
think that
It's never too late.
yeah. 10 years ago would have been nice.
Yeah, I guess there is like a sort of like a what do you call it? A deadline for that, right? A certain age point where it starts to become a little unrealistic doing stunts for movies and stuff.
Yeah, it's not only that, but it's like there's so much skill that stunt folks have, so much skill that you need to develop, whether it's in like
Yeah, probably
martial
takes a
arts or like
decade to get there.
falling. Yeah, definitely.
Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us and coming on. If people want to, learn more about your business, parkour, and your personal training, where can they find you?
Right now, you can mostly find me on Instagram at newfangled_axes. Website is being redone, so you can just find me on Instagram. Send me a DM. I like to chat. I'm in based in Los
Okay.
Angeles, specifically in the Hollywood, North Hollywood area, and I coach at a parkour gym called Vortex Free Running. So you can also find me there.
Okay. Awesome. You guys look her up if you guys want to jump off 10-story buildings.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks again so much for coming. And then we'll talk soon. Maybe we can do this again in the future.
Sounds great. Thank you so much, Eric.
Yeah, you're very welcome. All right. Bye, everybody.